Irish National Botanic Garden, Glasnevin, and she is in charge of the Economic Botany Collections. If you haven't been there, it's a beautiful garden in Dublin, and so it's very nice to have you here to talk about strengthening our social remit through Economic Botany Collections. That is a very important part of getting the knowledge over the collections that we have and how we use them. So, Ariane.
Good morning. I have a nice cup of coffee. So, I think we'd all agree that environmental degradation and the current extinction crisis are well documented and publicised phenomena. Efforts to disseminate information to the public have expanded and diversified in the last few decades through environmental NGOs, outdoor adventure centres and informal environmental education. There's also been what seems like an upsurge in community initiatives, preserving native woodlands and seed types, community gardens, organic vegetable growing, permaculture, bushcraft and foraging courses, which all suggest an overall greater appreciation for our natural heritage. And yet there's still a steady decline. And yet there's still a well-documented, widening gap between humans and the natural world. And the emergence of concepts such as the extinction of experience. There's still a steady decline in the interest of young people studying science, and the perpetuation, if not acceleration, of the ecological and humanitarian crisis. So what are we doing wrong? Growing up, I didn't have formal environmental education that's now compulsory in schools. I didn't have the environmental campaigns that today provide us with unlimited information. And I didn't have endless nature programs on TV. But considering how I turned out, I didn't need all of the present-day essentials. Instead, what I had was complete freedom to roam the countryside in which I grew up. I knew the environment intimately within a 2-mile radius of my house. I was up the fields, in the woods, climbing trees, catching shrews, eating blackberries. I had my escape routes and my dens. I knew that rosehips make you itch, elderberries make wine. The dock is the all-important antidote to nettle stings. And the buttercup is the only accurate way to identify if you're a true butter lover or not. I sucked pollen from the fuchsia flowers and still to this day fear and respect the fairies that live underneath the hawthorn trees. So as predicted, the recipe for developing an affinity and love for nature is unsupervised play and reckless exploration. But the childhood I had is not attainable to a large portion of the world's population. And nowadays, outdoor adventuring must compete with the latest technology and the expanding world of 2 dimensions. While the environmental apathy exhibited among people today is widely accepted as being a direct result of the absence of experience and regular contact with the natural world, as Stephen Keller has pointed out, our failure to recognise our species' basic dependence on nature as a condition for growth and development is another causing effect. The media and publicly oriented information highlights the magnitude of the crisis and the strategies and targets necessary to overcome it. We learn about various species, their habitats and their peril, as well as broader issues surrounding climate change. And while the importance and relevance of these topics is undeniable, unless the direct impact is visible on one's doorstep, they are easily overlooked and ignored. Being and acting environmentally aware is still considered a personal choice, not a prerequisite for survival. James Miller argued, to be successful in conserving biodiversity, the value and relevance of nature must be made relevant in the public mind, must be made clear to raise awareness of the broader ecological realities and provide the context for human life. But how can the value and relevance of nature be made more fundamental to people's lives when the importance and the impending loss of biocultural diversity receives little to no media coverage? If society is to overcome its estrangement from the processes involved in its subsistence, we will need to explore and exploit every means possible to get our message across. That's not to say that efforts aren't being made. Over the last few decades, economic botany and its related disciplines have grown and diversified. There's now a large body of empirical research that successfully demonstrates unique human human understanding of complex ecological processes, and in-situ conservation that demonstrates the role these insights and applications play in addressing contemporary ecological and social issues. Given the ongoing transformations experienced by biocultural systems and world economies, the field has experienced both a sense of relevancy and urgency in practice and education and outreach programs. There's also been an increasing number of NGOs and publications directly related to the promotion and preservation of biocultural diversity, for which there's now an endless supply of information available online. But I still feel that the majority of information available is geared towards those within the discipline from a scientific background, or for those who already have a really good idea as to what they're looking for. I can't shake the idea that in Ireland, anyway, the word, never mind the concept of ethnobiology, is still like a foreign language to the layperson and the environmental activist. If that is the case, could we not do more to relate the lessons we have learned? Given the knowledge we have, wouldn't you agree that ethnobotany, ethnobiology, should be widely understood and as overly applied terms as sustainability? Organisations like the Eden Project and increasingly botanic gardens and museums are making significant efforts to highlight our direct and indirect dependence upon plants and reach beyond their traditional audiences. But considering the in-depth knowledge we have following years of empirical research and collaborative work, we are well equipped to influence and address these issues in the public arena. So the question is not who is our target audience, but who are we not reaching? And for those who still need convincing, then how can we appear more accessible? Biocultural collections, perhaps more commonly known as Economic Botany Collections, are one way of achieving this. Some of these collections already fulfill their role as centres for scientific study and collaborate with universities and museums, but few have their own exhibition space and ongoing thematic displays. And most, such as the collection in Dublin Botanic Gardens, remain in storage, underutilised and lack efficient management. My intention this morning is to demonstrate to you how these collections can be used to push our message and our research findings to new audiences. If exhibited and managed like museums, these collections could represent the much-needed interface needed between science and public. They could reconnect people to the role plants play in their daily subsistence, revitalise local heritage, promote tolerance of cultural diversity, and a forum for issues surrounding environmental justice. As we move forward, we cannot ignore the fact that our reality is increasingly online. Younger generations are children of the digital era, native speakers in the language of technology. Where websites were once considered a glorified publication, today they are a fully realised and necessary medium for reaching broader audiences and connecting with the world. The Economic Botany Collection in Dublin Botanic Gardens, established in 1853 under David Moore, has a rich and diverse collection of approximately 6,000 artefacts of plant specimens from around the world. The collection is not digitalised, displayed, or publicly accessible. While it is considered a resource for those who wish to avail of it, up until recently there was no way of knowing it even existed. With my aspirations to restore the old museum building and exhibit its contents still a distant dream, using the resources available to me, I began building a website for the collection. By creating a website and showcasing its contents, I hoped to achieve 4 things. To make the collection known to the academic community, students and general public, improve visibility to other cultural organisations, public and government bodies, through enhanced usage, increase its reputation as a centre of social value and expertise, which would in turn increase its status and hope for future funding. And fourthly, promote the discipline and concepts of biocultural diversity, courses, databases, similar collections and reading materials. The hidden improvements from this project have been collections development that includes updating the catalogue, digitising and the completion of condition reports. The design of the site is partly on account of my rudimentary web authoring and design skills, but it was also my intention to create a site that was geared towards a non-scientific audience. such as young people, family, and lifelong learners. My aim was to make it as user-friendly and visually appealing to the best of my ability. Without a database to support it, it showcases only a tiny portion of the collection, and I was unable to provide people with the opportunity to run queries or search by scientific name. Instead, the contents are divided according to Tables 1, and in the case of materials, also Tables 2 of the TEDRIG Economic Botany Data Collection Standards. This, I feel, has attributed to making it accessible to a broader audience, as we're all familiar with terms such as food and medicine. Users are offered general information on biocultural diversity and the history of the collection. They can get a glimpse of the collection through a gallery slideshow or browse by category. Once an artefact is chosen, the user is given all available information from the catalogue and a description of the artefact that in some cases includes further usage of the plants. As the website is still a work in progress, some artefacts and use categories present more information than others, but I hope to balance that out over time. The website as it stands is a big step forward for Dublin's collection, but there's room for development and improvement. We could make greater efforts to engage visitors through object stories, uncover the scientific processes of extraction, or techniques of weaving through video footage, made in collaboration with the source communities, local communities, scientists and students. It was my hope to include a commons area underneath each artefact to encourage people to document any knowledge, stories or experiences they may have in relation to plant species and artefacts exhibited. These ambitions, however, cannot be fully realised in relation to this particular website, but as a result, the development of a new site called Ethnobotany Ireland is already underway. Ethnobotany Ireland hopes to achieve many of the objectives previously outlined, but on a grander scale. Through photographs of living plants and artefacts from the Economic Botany Collection, it aims to publish online folk and contemporary uses of Ireland's native and naturalised plant species, to create an interactive forum where people will be encouraged to recall and share old memories and experiences, and build a platform from which people conducting research in the area of Irish ethnobotany could uncover the methodologies and results of their work to the general public. But creating these websites is fruitless without publicising them in some manner or form. My hope is to have feature articles published in local newspapers and magazines, use various forms of social media, and contact directly university departments and lecturers. Hopefully, through these measures, we will see increased usage and interest in the Economic Botany Collection in Dublin. But if the true value of these collections is to be realised, they should aim to achieve far more than a website and online database. It was only after broadening my knowledge and skills in museum practice and management that I began to question why these collections don't function like museums already. Why aren't they up there at the top with our national museums, well established, well recognised, with the archaeological, natural history, ethnographic collections in art galleries? How is it that these collections of valuable food, medicines, fibres, plants of social and religious significance, cultural artefacts and intangible cultural heritage have not been at the forefront of the museological world since the establishment of the modern museum in the 18th century? Well, in some places they were. I'm sure there are collections similar to my own where a museum building did once exist with the collection on display for public curiosity. In some cases, old museums have been restored or established, such as those at Kew Gardens and the Botanical Museum in Beja, Portugal. But why some of these collections fell into oblivion and lost institutional support is worth questioning. Can it wholeheartedly be attributed to a lack of funding? Or is it a lack of recognition for the discipline and for the worth of these collections to society overall? Perhaps the use value of many of the materials we conserve has reduced over time, replaced by synthetic materials. But even so, the collection still has its history, the objects, their biographies, their ongoing importance to the sciences, and inevitably their place within the natural world. In fact, I would argue that biocultural collections are what John Dewey, George Kane, and other influential education and learning theorists of the last century would consider the epitome of museum collections. grown out of life experiences and immediately relevant to all, in which case we manage what should be a quintessential vehicle for the promotion of biocultural diversity and a facilitator in reaching international targets, such as number 14 of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. Well, why should we strive to become part of the museum sector? Museums have had an ambivalent existence that has faced controversy and criticism. On the one hand, they've been highly regarded as repositories for tangible and intangible cultural heritage, posterity and education, and on the other hand, the potential for artefacts to objectify notions of identity, ethnicity, and history made the museum's space a forum for identity building and nationalism, reinforcing ethnic boundaries, social inequality, and exclusion. But in order for museums to preserve the status of the respected, trusted, and valued institutions they aspire to be, they had to undergo immense structural and symbolic changes, redefining their purpose and place in relation to an increasingly multicultural, pluralistic, and information-driven society. Only through decades of scrutiny, theorising, and intense academic and public debate around issues of governance, ethics, and practices have museums been able to adapt and foresee the advances necessary for their survival, and today they are hugely successful. Today they confront and debate contested histories, science and technology, issues of ethnicity and representation, and give marginalised groups a voice. But in the last few decades, they've also taken a proactive stance in addressing environmental issues, conducting research in both ex situ and in situ conservation, intangible cultural heritage, and more recently, intangible natural heritage. With their now well-established and determined social role, it's not surprising that in recent years Botanic Gardens Conservation International have collaborated with the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries at the University of Leicester. Together they've drawn up a framework for ways Botanic Gardens can strengthen their social role, based upon theories and practices already utilised within the museum sector. Considering their content and expertise, Botanic Gardens are now encouraged to engage more actively in forming attitudes and behaviours towards the natural world. They're encouraged to bring science back into the real world, make explicit the interconnection between people and plants, illustrate how social and environmental responsibility is linked, and importantly, provide the tools for visitors to explore these issues and draw their own conclusions. New York Botanic Gardens is just one example where these concepts are flourishing. Not only are they respected for their quality and scope in research, but the steps they've taken towards engaging the public through thematic exhibitions and revealing the processes behind the science is admirable. Their current exhibitions, Wild Medicine, Healing Plants from Around the World, and Plants and Fungi, 10 Current Research Stories, are excellent examples of this. However, there's still a large number of organisations where their contribution to research and conservation remain largely hidden from the general public, where they take pride in their reputation as places of relaxation, venues that cater to a traditional audience, and where there appears to be little or no forum for the discussion of emotive topics like environmental justice. If biocultural collections, combined with insights from ethnobotanical research, were to function like contemporary museums, whether in or outside the context of the Botanic Gardens, they could make a significant contribution to fulfilling these objectives, bringing the discipline into the public eye and strengthening our social remit. If curators had the institutional support to expand with more force into the museum sector, they would have decades of empirical data to inform them of best practices in exhibition development, engagement, and governance, along with an established support network and diplomatic forum provided by the extensive museum community. The International Committee on Museums and Collections of Natural History, under the International Council of Museums, Economic, is only one example of an organised group with whom biocultural collections, curators, and ethnobotanists could collaborate. Economic shares many of the same ideologies and objectives, and is proactive in public engagement, intent on bridging the gap between scientific knowledge, traditional knowledge, and public awareness. The 2003 UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage was monumental for the museum sector, as it acknowledged the need to preserve the social environment and traditions from which museum collections stem. It also brought about a greater acceptance and consideration for the role local communities play in ensuring its maintenance. As natural history museums have become progressively more active in global conservation efforts, they've turned their interest to the environmental equivalent, now termed intangible natural heritage. This seeks to reach out past the confines of the museum, to focus on its processes and interactions, to investigate, record and preserve the knowledge and relationship people have with nature, and how these influences merged to produce natural history objects. As a new field of study, it is still working to understand what it should entail and how it is defined. But the recent publication, Intangible Natural Heritage, New Perspectives on Natural Objects, contains articles of immense similarity to what environmental anthropologists, ethnobotanists, ethnobiologists, and so on have been examining for decades. Surely we have a lot to contribute. With greater acknowledgement for Indigenous people and biocultural diversity, should we not be at the forefront of museum efforts in this area? Theories of learning and the educational value of museum displays and exhibitions has been an area long debated in museum studies. How do we meet the satisfaction requirements of our current information society? Should exhibitions be about objects or ideas? Progressive and constructivist models of learning, now widely recognised, argue that learning is an active and constructive process, continual, highly personal and contextual, depending upon one's social background and the personal circumstance of the museum visit. This coincides with a shift from thinking of the audience as passive and homogeneous to diverse, plural and active interpreters. Botanic gardens and museums are highly valued as venues for informal, free-choice learning, but many still adopt behaviourist, instructive model. A more progressive model, however, should be particularly appealing, as it would endeavour to create a progressive society of thinking individuals that, instead of reproducing current habits, should strive for improvement, something that directly relates to conservation efforts. John Dewey stressed the value of experience for education. The nature of biocultural collections can provide both experience and further reflection upon situations outside the museum walls. Even object-based exhibitions can lead to exciting ways of uncovering the field of economic botany, highlighting its interdisciplinary themes and controversies. We can go beyond the object to uncover the intangibles, the behaviours, processes and activities that brought them into being and gave them their identity. We can uncover a web of relationships between collectors, source communities, dealers, curators and scientists. We can investigate points of discovery, the motivations for collecting, the tools and methodologies. We can recount how and if the original context of the specimen changed throughout its life and how economic or scientific worth was established. The social value of some specimens might have only unfolded once in the collection, a rare specimen or a potential medicine. By deconstructing our artefacts, we can probe the social, political and historical contexts under which knowledge and interpretations were conceived. Through greater reflexivity, we can bring about scientific transparency and a public understanding of research, draw attention to how knowledge is produced and humanise the role of the ethnobotanist or ethnopharmacologist by providing insights into their respective professions and collaborations with local and Indigenous peoples. Some of your collections, contain large amounts of specimens originating from those considered the pioneers of our discipline, Richard Evans Schultes, Richard Spruce and Timothy Plowman. The intrepid explorations that these men embarked on can captivate, amaze and arouse emotion and curiosity. We can take the collections further through thematic exhibitions based on current institutional research or local community initiatives, and support our displays with other forms of visual media, photographs, video footage and oral histories collected in the field. We could bring to the fore issues surrounding traditional knowledge, intellectual property rights, bioprospecting and biopiracy. On the whole, we should hope to endeavour to facilitate visitors in their own meaning-making and inquiry-based learning, in which we can only hope that they would begin to see themselves in and not apart from the natural world. As free choice learning has become increasingly popular in the 21st century, museology has sought to find ways in which museums are better equipped to meet their users' needs. If we strive to become facilitators of knowledge, through which people can draw upon their own experiences and reach their own conclusions, then we must also strive to eliminate the authoritative curatorial voice and adopt a more bottoms-up and democratic approach. In Australia, the Fremantle History Museum is only one of many that now support community access galleries, in which self-defined groups can develop and mount their own exhibitions. By incorporating a greater range of people, local and source communities, minority and marginalised groups, into the decision-making and exhibition development process, we could hope to reach those previously overlooked, revitalise local heritage, and create a sense of collective ownership through new people, new voices, and new interpretations. Coming from an environmental perspective, we should hope to demonstrate that community is constructed not only at a local and national level, but at a global level also. Like every specific area within ethnobiology, biocultural collections have received increased attention and recognition in recent years. Considerable efforts are being made to bring these collections out from the dusty spaces in which many occupy, to create a forum for standards of curation and online databases. The website for biocultural collections, the Synthesis Workshop, just held at Kew Gardens on ethnobiology collections, and the soon-to-be-published book, Curating Biocultural Collections, further emphasise this. For any collection to move forward, it must firstly receive institutional support and an organised level of administration. But as we work towards these goals, we should have a determined destination that goes beyond in-house management and online databases. Museum professionals are exploring the ethics and practices of collecting, managing, and preserving intangible cultural and natural heritage, an area in which we possess enormous expertise, but clearly lack the accomplished public forum and educational capacity provided by the museum. But for us to remain separate entities in this endeavour seems fruitless. We need to collaborate and diversify. Two things we are very successful at doing, just in a different dimension. Ethnobiology 5 calls for greater articulation of insights, new approaches to knowledge sharing, creativity and communication, increased public awareness and greater prominence within academia and socio-ecological debate. In the recent article, Taking Stock in Ethnobiology, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? The authors argue, if ethnobiology as a field is going to achieve its full relevance in the scientific and social realms, ethnobiologists need to take stock of the broader ethnobiological community. I say, if ethnobiology as a field is going to achieve its relevance in the scientific and social realms, ethnobiologists need to take stock of the general public. We need to identify where our interface between academe and public lies, and like the museum, we need to reassess our purpose and mission. Look at the materials already in our possession that can respond to the needs of future generations and facilitate a shift from theory and research to public engagement.
Thank you very much, Ariane. Very challenging, and so many of us have ethno